Hello and welcome to some exclusive GB News online content, and it's a subject that I know every single one of you cares deeply about. Why? Well, because it's so shocking we can hardly believe it's true, but unfortunately this is the world we live in. We are about to hurtle headfirst into the civil service and the way that this has been captured by radical woke ideology, and that has an impact on all of our lives, because the civil service is supposed to, anyway, be helping to run the country. And I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by James Esses, who's a campaigner, he's a commentator, he's a huge amount of work in this field as well, co-founder of Thoughtful Therapist. James, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. I've been reading quite a lot about this, actually. I mean, the near total capture of our civil service by unbelievable woke ideology, including some of the language that you're allowed to use or not allowed to use, is remarkable, isn't it? What stands out for you?
You're completely right, Patrick. I mean, this stuff is so deeply embedded now, it's difficult to see how we can reverse back from it. People often say you should be concerned about things that are going on behind closed doors, but what strikes me, particularly about this material, is that the civil service and the wider public sector are almost proud of this. They have it all out in the open in many ways for everyone to see, and kind of they want to say, look at us, look how progressive we are. But in reality, what they are doing is policing language. They are forcing ideologies down both the staff and the customers' throats. I mean, in this particular civil service guide, there was an inclusive language guidance for civil servants. This is over in Northern Ireland. And basic everyday terms are no longer permitted on the basis that they could be offensive to someone. So, for example, mum and dad can no longer use that, of course, because that might be offensive to someone with a different gender identity. You cannot use terms like falling on deaf ears or blind drunk in case you're offending people with certain disabilities. And particularly from a civil service perspective, because this is the work they're involved in, you can't use the phrase illegal immigrant, even if that's exactly what you're describing. It's a factual statement. You can't use that. And you can't use the word ex-offender. You have to say person who has had convictions. Again, the kind of focus being that you might hurt some former convicts' feelings rather than stating facts. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, but language really does matter. And actually, I must say, just to digress slightly, it ties in a little bit with something that's happening right now with the Chris Cabba case, where we are seeing people go into bat for this guy. I mean, if you read things like the IOPC or the CPS, they say, we respect the verdict of the jury. And like they disagree with it, but they respect it. This guy was a career criminal, for goodness sake, who, it's on video opening fire in a busy nightclub a couple of days before he was shot and killed by police. And that language that they use there, describing him as a Mobo Award nominated father-to-be, as opposed to, gangland trigger man. I mean, there is really quite a stark contrast there. There's also a lot of guides here, though. LGBTQ plus role models guides. We've got Let's Get Better Together. Every word counts. This is as part of the civil service as well. When it comes to the LGBT side of things, I can't help but wonder whether or not embedded in all of this is an attack on the nuclear family, as if that is a bad thing.
Well, it's an attack on the concept of womanhood. It's an attack on the concept of children going through natural puberty and progressing into adults that are comfortable in their bodies. I mean, it attacks everyone's basis of reality, and it forces, and this is particularly relevant for the civil service, it forces people to believe things that they know in their hearts are not true. So in this transitioning at work policy that now applies to civil servants, female colleagues are expected to share work, toilets, changing rooms, even showers with male colleagues who identify as women. And if they speak out about this, they are deemed to be antagonistic bigots or transphobes as a result. I mean, I just can't imagine having to work in that kind of atmosphere. And in terms of the nuclear family, we're told that there are hundreds of gender identities, hundreds of sexualities. I mean, what business is it of any employer, let alone a public sector employer, to kind of shove this rhetoric down the throats of their employers? But I mean, going back to what you were talking about, the Chris Cabba case and other things, I mean, this seems to operate in one direction only. And we seem to have almost an allowance for racism, bigotry in the other direction. So to give an example of something that I've just put out online today, there is an NHS trust in East London who are looking for psychologists, trainee psychologists to come on placement. And the recruiting manager, who's a senior psychologist herself, has specifically said that she is looking for trainees who work using a, quote, anti-whiteness model. I mean, this is absolutely mental. This is racism.
Well, it is racism. It is racism. Do we have any idea what an anti-whiteness model is? I mean, what is that? What would that even be?
Well, I presume. I mean, this is going viral at the moment. I've not seen her follow-up remarks on this. I suppose if you were to ask her, she might say that, well, you know, she's trying to decolonize psychology, and she's trying to right historic wrongs that took place, you know, in the profession in the past. I don't know, but what I read of that, I mean, anti-whiteness is anti-whiteness. At the end of the day, she views white people, the nation of the concept of being white, with some sort of disdain. Almost. I don't know, but it's racist.
Using the internet without a VPN is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. We want to help protect you. This video's sponsor, Private Internet Access, is the VPN to help keep you safe. Now, you might be asking, what is a VPN? Well, a virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. This way, it shields your digital life from the eyes of those that are looking to exploit your private information. Whenever you connect to the internet on a public Wi-Fi network, such as at airports, coffee shops, friends' houses, or even in your own home, your data is at risk of being stolen. Hackers that are connected to the same Wi-Fi network have the ability to steal your personal data with ease. T-Mobile reached a settlement this year with the US Federal Communications Commission after they suffered data breaches in 2021, 22, and 23. In 2023 alone, over 37 million customers' data was exposed. And it's not just hackers to be concerned about. Information can be censored. When Canada passed their C-18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news content that you love. Private Internet Access is available for all platforms: Windows, macOS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one Private Internet Access subscription to protect an unlimited number of devices at the same time. Plus, we've got a huge GB News discount. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get 83% off PIA. That is under £2 a month, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free. There's also a 30-day money-back guarantee. So head to piavpn.com/GB News to start protecting yourself digitally today.
Well, it ties in, doesn't it, with another story that was around this week, which is whether or not we should stop referring to people as ethnic minorities and actually refer to them as being part of the global majority. Now, that's quite interesting, because in Britain, at least for the moment anyway, the major demographic is white, okay? But we have large proportions of a variety of different ethnic minorities as part of our national demographic. But the second you flip that on its head, and white people, now I'm going to make this very, very clear, and I genuinely mean this, that anyone of any colour or ethnic background can indeed be British. So I'm not saying that only white people can be British. However, if you just take it at its most kind of basic sense, the idea that you say that white people in their own country are part of a global minority, I think it stops feeling a little bit like home, doesn't it? And I wonder whether or not it's designed to do that. It's designed to break down the idea of belonging to any kind of nation.
I think so. I think it's part of a globalist agenda. I mean, in this country, we see a real lack of integration, not from everyone, but I think there's a lot of that out there, and a real dilution of British culture. And we know that there's attacks going on in terms of, British colonial past, but that almost expands out into being a kind of general criticism of British people and the British way of life. But from a kind of psychological perspective, it's very interesting because on the one hand, we are told that we must celebrate all of these other cultures, and you've got days, weeks and months, to celebrate Black history, Black culture and all the rest of it, which is fine on one level. But on the other hand, we've got this perpetual victim card being played in which if you are Black in British society, you are told in school, and I've seen the material suggesting this, that the odds are stacked against you, that we are living in an inherently racist society, that you have to combat racist structures throughout your entire life. As far as I'm concerned, you kind of can't have it both ways, really. But again, we just seem to be seeing discriminatory conduct in the other direction. To give another example, the National Education Union, which is the main union for teachers, recently put out a job advert for an equalities lead. And they specified in the job advert that any applicants have to be Black. Again, I thought that was racism.
Yeah. Well, it is. But also, as well, to be honest with you, completely self-defeating, because then what happens when the balance is tipped? And I mean, there are huge amounts of primary schools, especially primary schools now. I mean, I see them all the time around where I live. You see them anecdotally right across the country, and people tell me about it all the time as well, where white people are in the minority at those schools. So if you were to have some kind of diversity or equality or inclusion person there, it would actually, in some senses, make more sense if they were white. But I wonder if there's a power thing at play. So with that thing like the global majority issue versus the global minority issue, it reinforces the idea that this small minority of elitist white people had taken control of the world and taken control of everyone, and it reinforces that power notion to try to encourage people to not necessarily rise up or anything like that, but to try to reinforce the fact that there has been systematic oppression, and frankly that we're the bad guys in all of this. But that victimhood, I don't think that gets anyone anywhere. When I see a lot of people interviewed about this who are from a variety of different communities, whether that be Black or Asian in some way, the ones who normally seem to be incredibly successful are the ones who refuse to listen to that kind of pity narrative, really.
Quite right. But again, you can't have it both ways. You're either a majority or a minority. You're either going to play up to your strengths and kind of say, look how far we've come and look how much power and influence, rightly so, we have in the world, or it's we're a minority, we're an oppressed people. But they seem to want to kind of wear both hats, which I just think is disingenuous. But you're right. I think there are a lot of decent people out there who fundamentally consider themselves to be British, and they just try and ignore this. But I'm most concerned for the children in schools, because they've been fed this stuff day in and day out, and I'm worried we're going to have an entire generation of essentially self-hating Britons.
Yeah, and just to kind of come full circle in a way, there's some other stuff here. This is the Civil Service Inclusive Language Guide, which feeds into a lot. I mean, actually, on this, it's quite funny anyway, because the emblems that you've got, the Civil Service Inclusive Language Guide appears to have been signed in conjunction with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 other groups here, including things like the Mental Health Charter, it's got the Silver Diversity Mark, so it hasn't been given the gold standard. I mean, goodness knows what you'd have to do in order to get the gold standard. But this includes things like it's raining cats and dogs. We shouldn't say it's raining cats and dogs in front of international or neurodivergent colleagues or customers to prevent confusion. Okay, slightly bizarre. I mean, how dare our international friends bother to learn some of our colloquial terms? We couldn't have that now, could we? Always use plural pronouns, always. Avoid using the term man-made. Instead, say artificial/synthetic to prevent sexism. Now, most people's reaction is exactly what your reaction will be, and everyone's reaction watching or listening to this at home, which is, that's absolutely mental, okay? However, not for our civil servants. And the reason why this is so important is because it is these people who are actually trusted to, a lot of the time, draw up and enact government policy, the democratic will of the people. And if these are the people who are entrusted with it, then it can't be done, can it? They set the tone for the rest of the nation. And I think they are so out of step with the rest of the nation.
Quite right. And taxpayers' money is being used to produce these guides. And I worked in the civil service for a number of years, and I know that a guide like this would have taken God knows how many hundreds of manpower hours. I mean, I dread to think. So taxpayers' money has been spaffed on that. Equally, the civil service by its very nature is meant to be ideologically neutral. I mean, and at one point the civil service in this country was, and it was a great institution because of it, but now essentially civil servants are doing the kind of woke bidding of their masters. I mean, it's really quite depressing. I mean, and some of the examples you gave there, it goes into the kind of ridiculous hyper political correct territory in which people are having to walk on constant eggshells, even over seemingly completely harmless conduct. So not in this guide, but in other kind of inclusive language guides, I've seen reference to the fact that if you say to somebody who you know for a fact English is not their first language, after they've done a presentation, your English is really good, that is a microaggression. It's not just you being polite or welcoming. And I've even seen that if you have a disabled colleague in a wheelchair at work and you hold the door open for them, that is a microaggression because it's ableist and it's assuming that they can't do it for themselves. I mean, what is going on?
Well, yeah, but what's the alternative now? You slam it in the face? Like, is that what it is? Do you put the accent on of the Chinese man who was sitting in the front row and deliberately patch? I mean, it's insane. You don't do this stuff. You just go back. You know what it is, though? Fundamentally, it's completely and utterly joyless. And this is one thing when you hear. I don't know if anyone's done a study on this. I would love it if they did. Although, unfortunately, the kind of people that commission studies tend to be very woke, and it has to be about something like decolonising the labia. Otherwise, you don't get £250,000 from Edinburgh University. But I would love to see someone do a study between young people with things like depression and anxiety and how much they adhere to this manifesto of woke tosh that we've got in front of us here. You've got to ask people what pronouns they prefer. Don't say good morning guys / ladies and gentlemen. It's got to be everyone and folks. It's ridiculous. You can't refer to people as homeless. So if you got out of a tube station and stepped over a bloke who was literally physically sleeping on the street and had clearly been there for some time, you would just have to say that person was experiencing homelessness. They were experiencing it as if it was a one-off. There's no kind of the suspension of reality, the constant treading on eggshells, the constant risk of offending someone, the constant risk of being called a bigot and ostracised for not keeping up with the latest fad. I don't think it's good for our nation's mental health.
I think that's a very important point you've raised, Patrick, and I'm coming from a therapeutic perspective, and I've seen this stuff filter down into the therapy room, and I've spoken to clients who have been chastised by their therapists for the political views that they hold, or, I had one guy who, he was going through a tough time. He was a straight white male, one of those awful types, and he was going through a really difficult time. And he kept saying to me, this is when I was in therapy with him, he said, my last therapist kept telling me that I was privileged and that I had nothing to complain about because I was a straight white man. And so now every time something goes wrong in my life and I feel sad about it, I beat myself up for feeling sad because I should feel good because I'm privileged. I mean, this is what we're actually exacerbating mental ill health through this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is a really, really interesting anecdote, actually, because asking people to constantly look into their own perceived privilege, and also historical as well, like their historical privilege. By the way, I am absolutely convinced that the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who a while ago announced that the Church of England was going to give £1 billion in slavery reparations. And I thought, gosh, that's a large number. That's a heck of a large number, that. And then it's emerged today that his own family kept slaves. And I thought, right, there we go. So you were concerned that was going to get out in the public. So what you thought you'd do is you preempt it by giving £1 billion of someone else's money to reparations for goodness knows who, because actually you feel bad about what your great-grandfather may or may not have done. And that kind of sums it up. But I do worry that we are creating a suspension of reality. You touched on that right at the start when it comes to, gender neutral pronouns, but also about, men in women's changing rooms. We're creating safety issues there. We are also, I think exacerbating mental health problems massively and just kind of creating a sense of misery. The only problem is, how do we actually reverse this? Because it's gone so far, and in a way, I'm actually quite impressed with the left, and it is the left, but anyone who says it's not the left is wrong, because I don't really seriously ever think anyone who is on the right, I've never met anyone on the right who's obsessed with pronouns. I've never met anyone on the right who's really obsessed with this kind of stuff. So for me, it is very much a left-wing issue. But I was impressed with the way that they managed to infiltrate and indoctrinate people quite subtly for a long period of time, and then control the narrative around that. And here we are now. But how do we reverse this? What has to happen? You don't want to go to some kind of re-education camp. It's all very sinister, isn't it?
In truth, Patrick, I don't think we'll ever fully reverse this. It's become, they played a blinder strategically. Yeah. It's quite incredible what they've done, but they've managed to infiltrate an entire lexicon and culture. I think we actually need to start from the bottom up. Terms like LGBT, which roll off the tongue so easily, and actually we need to do away with some of these terms altogether. But I don't think that's going to happen. The last government published schools guidance to try and tackle indoctrination in schools. I'm being sent stuff by parents every day. Indoctrination is still rife. I've done so many exposés on private corporations, public sector bodies who are pushing divisive and dangerous ideologies on the staff and customers. They get a bit of a hit in the media, the customer base takes a fall, and then they go back to it again. Nothing seems to stop this. So I'm afraid I'm the ultimate cynic. I think we've kind of gone too far, but what we need to keep doing en masse, and I encourage anyone listening to do this, is to call this stuff out as you hear it in the moment. And it's tough, and it's anxiety inducing, and everyone's walking on eggshells. But unless we start to push back on a regular basis against this stuff, it's just not going to change.
Yeah, it's not. But I do take heart, and I'm sure this happens to you as well, but I do take heart quite regularly. There's a gym just opposite where I live, which gives me no excuse not to go, right? Because I can see it. I can practically touch it from my front door. So I go in there a little bit, and the people that talk to me most there, who come up to me, yesterday was a Polish chap. There's an Iranian man, there's a Caribbean gentleman as well, and his wife as well, who is also of Caribbean heritage. They are the people who are the most avid GB News watchers in the world, as far as I can tell, who are desperate to come up and talk to me all the time and talk to me about things going on. And this is the kind of stuff that they push back on. This is the kind of stuff that they say, look, this is ridiculous. Why is no one talking about it? And I actually think that through people like yourself, and I hope anyway through a bit of what we're doing here now, and quite a large group of others as well, who are quite active in calling this stuff out, it normalises it for other people so that they do feel more comfortable around the dinner table or wherever they may be to actually push back a bit. Because it is a scary thing. It is a bit scary. If you're the only one there who maybe, feels willing to vocalise this, nobody psychologically likes to be the odd one out, do they? So it has to be normalised a bit to be able to push back on it, and hopefully we can do that. But Jones, I could talk to you all day, my good man, but I think I've prattled on at you long enough now. But thank you very, very much for today, and I do hope to chat to you again really soon. For it's James Esses there, and you can just check out all of his stuff online and to make sure that you do so, because it is incredibly worthwhile. So James, take care, mate. Until next time.
Thanks, Patrick. Take care.